no me gusta. I'm lost without you.
I think sometimes we remember things all blown up out of proportion, either too good or too bad. I'm trying to put things back into perspective so there'll be some objective viewpoint about this family that I can give to my kids. And they also happen to be sort of well known, so maybe you'll enjoy it too.
She was always a goer. Whatever group she was in charge.
I mean, she could always entertain, and she could always get an audience. We'd go to a party, and she was it.
I think that people who have known her and love to talk about her are people who have not realized the depth of her suffering in her life. They have taken it for granted that she's was always a clown, and that she, I mean, they haven't studied clowns. They don't know that clowns generally have a very bad personal life. There's always big holes in it. And there certainly was in Lucille's life.
Where did you come from originally?
I'm from Jamestown, New York.
And how did you get here? I mean, did you...
I walked.
No.
Yes, I did. I hitchhiked from Jamestown.
She knew Jamestown wasn't for her.
She was just so different from all the other girls around there.
Her life was I don't think, very happy when she was a child, and I never knew that because she told me all about how beautiful Jamestown was, and the change of seasons was what I heard about.
That's where your mother's love of Currier and Ives, those prints, because the lake froze over in the wintertime and you ice skated, and Grandpa built a toboggan.
I, of course, before I started this exploration, never knew the answers to any of the questions about why my mother worked the way she did, or what was she running from, or even the fact that she was running. But now, after having talked to some of these people and listened to tapes and reread interviews and with people, I think it was an inbred thing in her. First of all, she came from a family of people who had been through great tragedy, great poverty, a lot of death.
Everyone knows that if a little girl loses her father when she's young, it has a terrible effect on her the rest of her life.
Your mother was not yet 4 years old, and Dee Dee was pregnant with Freddie, and her young husband, he contracted typhoid fever. And I don't know how long a period he was ill, but he died.
My father died before I was born. So Mother's father, my grandfather, he brought us up.
Grandpa Hunt was, of course, the patriarchal figure. It was his home in which we were all raised. And he, of course, had a great deal of influence on all of us. He was the daddy figure.
He was a benevolent despot. That is, he ruled the family and everybody in it. But while he was deeply loved by his family, and of course called Daddy, he was not popular around the village, mainly, of course, because of his affiliation with the Socialist Party.
Grandfather always had leanings towards the working man, because after all, he was a working man before there were unions to protect them or anything else.
We didn't play. We worked. And Lucy and I and Cleo, we took care of the house, including animals and chickens and pigs and so forth.
Her mother worked, and they were out evenings, and Lucille was on her own. That was all there was to it. She was a non-existent mother, you might say. She'd just come up maybe on Sunday or something.
Her mother wasn't there. I didn't know that. I didn't know that Dee Dee wasn't there all the time. When I grew up, Dee Dee was St. Dee Dee. She was so needed and wanted and loved in our family. She was the most loved person in our whole family. And it's hard for me to believe that Dee Dee would leave her children alone for those long stretches of time. So went away for a year or two or something with her second husband.
Ed did not, very frankly, want to be a stepfather. He didn't want to be held down by children. He wanted a young wife. He wanted to party. And so they had to question, what are we going to do with Lucille? And so they thought the obvious answer was put her with Grandma Peterson. She never told me that she missed her father's, being with her. or that she resented her mother abandoning her, as you might say. But I know that these were very, very traumatic things for her.
My grandmother, Dee, was something. She was a real no-nonsense kind of person. Dee always used to tell me, she said, I married Ed Peterson because he wore nice hats. But he didn't like my kids and he drank, so we left him. So then they all had to move back in with Grandpa Hunt.
My grandfather used to take us to vaudeville every Saturday. And I grew to love it. So all I knew is I wanted to be in vaudeville and I wanted to make people laugh. I certainly didn't want to make them cry, you know.
Solron Park, that was a very important part of my life and Lucy's life, too.
It was just a wonderful, wonderful place. Oh, and that big Phoenix wheel. And, of course, we would go to the theater when we could. Lucille, of course, had more freedom than any of the rest of us.
Oh, she was full of hell all the time.
Her reputation was that she was a wild girl.
I ran away from home so many times that my mother finally said, well, that's it. I've had it.
And you came to New York?
So she sent me to a dramatic school here, and they kept me about 3 months, and they said, you got nothing, go home and get married or something. Really. And I went back to school for a while.
It was the tragedy that broke up the whole home life and sent everyone in different directions. And it happened that Grandpa was in possession of a .22 rifle.
And we were target practicing. And this girlfriend of mine had the rifle aimed at the little Erickson boy who was sitting on the ground, the neighbor, jumped up.
Just as Ruth shot the gun, and the bullet lodged right in his spine. The child was paralyzed for life and in a wheelchair.
Well, Grandpa was charged.
And he was held responsible for allowing minors to shoot a gun.
As a result of that, Grandpa lost the house and everything, and every dime that they had.
My mother saw what happened to the family, and especially to her daddy, to Grandpa Hunt. I think that she felt now it was up to her to bring the whole family back together again. So she went back to New York for a few years where she could get work as a model.
And I was a good model, and I worked at Hattie Carnegie's. Then Mr. Goldwyn needed some poster girls for Roman Scandals.
And I was walking down the street one day, and this lady, who was an agent, said, how would you like to go to California? And I said, now? And she said, Saturday. That was a Wednesday. I said, well, what would I do in California? And she said, I just came from the Sam Goldwyn office. One girl's mother plucked her from the group and said she could not go. They have no time to test. You fill the bill.
Well, Lucy headed for Hollywood, and she arranged to come there first and just to tell me and hug me and love me and tell me that we'll all be together. I mean, she was so certain she was going to be successful and stay in Hollywood, and you're going to come to California, and you're going to, you know, and we're all going to be together. Kind of keep the faith.
Be sure and get your man. Wrap your body in a coat of tan. Keep young and beautiful if you want to be loved. You'll always have your way if he likes you in a negligee. Keep young and beautiful if you want to be loved. Acumba, cumba, cumba, cumbanchero. A bongo, 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 cero.
Desi came from a wealthy and powerful Cuban family. They had homes, farms, horses, everything.
My father was the mayor of my hometown. My uncle was the chief of police. We had that town pretty well. Really well.
My father was born on March 2nd, 1917 in Santiago de Cuba. It was a very aristocratic group. My great-grandfather, Desiderio Alberto Arnaz I, was a doctor who charged up San Juan Hill with Teddy Roosevelt. And my grandfather, Desiderio II, was a doctor who was also the mayor of Santiago. My grandmother was Dolores de Acha. They called her Lolita. She was one of 12 children, and her father was very big in rum.
Desi was a very musical person. And he was the most happy person when he was singing and with his guitar. And serenading the girls. Desi's father, he wanted his son to be a doctor, and that was his dream. But the revolution changed the whole life of Desi. Desi's father, unfortunately, was on the side of the government. The revolution brought him down. They burned Desi's home. They put his father in prison, and Desi and his mother barely escaped alive. The last thing his father said to him was, "Take care of your mother. We will all get back together again."
We came to this country and we didn't have a cent in our pockets. From cleaning canary cages to this night here in New York, it's a long ways. And I don't think there's any other country in the world that could give you that opportunity. I want to say thank you, America, thank you.
My grandfather had enough clout left to arrange for a scholarship with the Jesuits so that his son could finish high school. Grandpa Arnaz's dream was always for his son to go to college and to become a doctor. Instead, Dad bought a $5 guitar and got a job with a little Cuban dance band called the Siboney Septet. They were playing at the Roney Plaza in Miami, and Xavier Cugat saw him and gave him his first really big break.
I was with Cugat, and even though he didn't pay much money, I had to steal buns and celery at the Waldorf, but I learned a hell of a lot about the band business.
Desi wanted to have his own sound, his own individuality.
I said, Cugat, I gotta quit. I gotta get my little band. And he says, you'll die of hunger. Nobody knows the rumba in this country. I says, I'm dying of hunger now, so what's the difference?
He went back to Miami, where his mother was, and put together a little rumba band. Desi's father was a playboy. When he came to Miami, he divorced his mother. Desi felt very bad about it. He had tried to keep his family together. After the divorce, Lolita came to live with Desi.
It was always important to my father and my mother to take care of the rest of their families.
Well, I came out by Greyhound bus. And she met me in full makeup and took me right back to the studio to have lunch. And I walk into the commissary at RKO, and I mean, there at one table is Katharine Hepburn, his name is Cary Grant.
She picked me up at the downtown bus station in Los Angeles, and she was driving a Buick convertible. And she gave me the wildest ride I've ever had in my life.
And I had this big conga drum with me. Now, in Cuba, everybody does the conga in carnival time, particularly my hometown. It's like the Mardi Gras in New York. Everybody from the island comes to Santiago, and they do the conga line. It goes on for 3 days.
He himself, in 1940, at the conga nightclub, he introduced the conga rhythm from Cuba in Broadway.
He was wonderful. Desi Arnaz had one of the great personalities of all time. When he started pounding those conga drums, there was nobody like Desi.
New York in those days was very innocent and very exciting to be a part of. The El Morocco, the Stoll Club group, and your father was the toast of the town.
He was a Don Juan. I think he loved to think all the girls were mad for him, and actually they were. His problem was getting rid of them.
So while my father was doing 5 shows a night in New York, my mother was making 5 or 6 pictures a year in Hollywood at RKO as a contract player.
Tell me, little boy, did you get a whistle or a baseball bat with that suit?
And was very happy with everything that went on at RKO. Everything that they gave me, I did happily.
Ferdinand, come to Mama.
The other models are waiting. Shall I send them in, too?
No, you'd better give this one the job if she's that desperate.
Oh, but
Dismiss the others. All right, take your clothes off.
Just a minute, Casanova.
I'm only offering you what you can get through those straws.
I was doing Too Many Girls in New York. I mean, that was the name of the play.
Yes, yes.
The show was a great success, an RKO, but the film rights.
Desi and myself were rehearsing for Too Many Girls on a big sound stage, and Lucille came on.
And she came in with a very lovely pair of yellow slacks and a tan sweater and blonde hair. She was a blonde then. And those big, beautiful blue eyes. And I said to the piano player, "Oh man, that's a hunk of woman."
Will someone please come? There's a waiter fainted out here.
You realize she had never married. Her career had absorbed her whole life. She was now 30. And when she saw Desi, she just came home and she said, "That's it. That's for me." They were dating. And, but he was also dating Lana Turner, Betty Grable. I mean, our competition was pretty good.
She just told me she was madly in love with Desi, and it was just Desi, Desi, Desi.
And then the picture was over. Now he goes back to New York. She found reasons to be able to have for RKO, to go back, do publicity. She'd do anything they wanted, as long as it was back, you know, in New York.
I was working at the Roxy Theater in New York, and she was in New York, and she was giving an interview about why we were not going to get married. I said, this lady is not going to come across with this article very good because I'll marry you tomorrow. She says, why? I says, I want kids, and I love you. So we got married the next day.
It didn't take long to do it. And we got the call that they had eloped to Connecticut.
All the women were mad for him, but your mother got him.
Now is the right time, let's make it stay, 'cause you're the one that I pray for.
He loved the whole family thing, of course, because he too was an exile from his roots. And here he walks into a family scene. This isn't just an actress in Hollywood, but she has a mother and a grandfather and sisters and brothers and a home.
Your name and mine had been written in the stars, made for each other. Like sun and sky, we'll have each other as years go by. We'll share together the dreams that you and I made for each other.
Everything about the place was, you know, they were so much in love. This is their first home.
It was the most hospitable, warm, happy house.
Parties were always going on, and he built little pavilions and barbecues and things so that it reminded him of Cuba.
She was out in that garden digging and hoeing and raking those vegetables and fruit every day. She was a real earth woman.
I never knew there were 10 years of home movies of the two of them together when they were first married and living in Chatsworth at the place I was born. And I was astounded because in the later years, those later years when I was 7 and 8, they didn't seem real happy together. But all of a sudden there was this footage of the two of them snuggling and being silly and throwing snowballs at each other and dressing up in costume and doing things that kids do, newlyweds do, and people with their first home. And the kinds of friends that they had from radio days and theater days?
Oh, that's June Havoc and Van Johnson at Lucille Ball's beautiful ranch outside of Reseda. That was the most beautiful swimming pool. It was like an old swimming hole with a tree trunk with a diving board over it. Was I ever that young?
Well, one Sunday, I guess, Lucy had said, well, bring him out here. Bring him and his girlfriend out here, you know. So Benita and I, we found our way out to Chatsworth. And just, as you can see, just had a lovely, lovely time.
Your father also was an enormous, wonderful cook. And they would have great parties where he would, his black beans and rice and all of those things, the Cuban dishes that he would cook. And the parties were his prerogative. I mean, he would plan them, he would invite me, he would do the cooking. Of course, he was visited constantly by this crazy group of New Yorkers from the La Conga Club.
He was the star of that house, you know. The public went for Lucy, of course, but at home, Desi was the star. He took over.
Oh, I thought he was so gorgeous. He was so charming. You know, he exuded warmth. Those brown eyes and that face, and always smiling, as opposed to Lucille, who didn't smile all the time. She wasn't witty. She didn't make bon mots. She was a very serious woman.
Lucy was always very quiet, really. Lucy'd make a comment every now and then, but Desi took over.
He had a way about him of coming into a room that was joyous. He had a joy of living about him.
So they had this idyllic place, and they indulged themselves with dogs, and they had cocker spaniels and
Oh, she loved puppies, I think. If it wasn't for Desi, she'd have had a yard full of puppies, I think.
They had a cow. You've heard about her, the Duchess of Devonshire. That from a little calf like this, and it grew and it grew and it grew to a big cow, where it was practically, I think, attacking your father. I mean, it was.
She used to tell me the cow was in love with Dad.
Absolutely in love with Desi.
Come right into the bedroom.
Yeah, in love with him.
And they loved to have, you know, the family. And it was always open house. Wonderful times. It was probably the happiest time.
When they were newlyweds, my parents were both under contract to RKO. Who knew they would end up owning a studio one day?
Danny, I don't want the kind of hit and miss marriage my mother had. I know Father was good to her, but she spent her whole life trying to get him to settle down.
My mother told me there'd be days like this when the wind would begin to blow and I wouldn't know where to go. She said the night would be so cold and dark and I'd be all alone and every dream I own would blow away.
I mean, this gal, you know, by that time she was queen of the bees, but that looked like it was about it.
I was happy to do anything that anybody wanted me to do because I was learning all the time. And I never complained. I never thought that it was better if I said, I won't do that, that's beneath me. Or I just wanted to be in there and learning.
Okay, she's got what I want.
My mother worked pretty much non-stop, but my father was only cast occasionally. And that was usually as a Latin lover.
Please. This is very embarrassing to me.
The studio heads in those days were very concerned if you had an accent from a foreign country, especially.
Cody.
You're wrong again, sugar. It's...
No, no, no. I will not give up.
Desi was afraid of being typed, of playing things where they might be degrading his nationality.
I'm sick of just being a taxi driver.
Steve, I'm no more cut out to be a taxi driver than I am to be a butler. But as long as you give away the easy touches, we'll be lucky to make a living.
I never worry about finances.
He had a concern about him being a little younger than Lucy, that everybody was looking at him because he was younger and because she was older and maybe making more money, which she was.
When Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, my father rushed down to enlist in the U.S. Navy, but he was turned down.
They wouldn't draft him because he wasn't a citizen, exactly. But he wanted his citizenship.
So he did what he could. He made patriotic films.
Tell me, how is it a Cuban hotfoot like you comes all the way over here to join the United States Navy?
Well, the United States helped to make Cuba free, so I come here to free the United States.
I think you got something there. Get on board, sailor.
Aye, aye. ¿Cómo tú te llamas, Masabi? ¿Cómo tú te llamas, Masabi? What is your name? Listen to me. Todo el mundo dice Masabi.
He was a sailor. We were enlisted men, and it was, in those days, a brave little piece of casting to show another piece of America, this young fellow with an accent and everything else.
Yeah, Desi was very underrated as an actor. I remember one, Bataan, he had a death scene, which is more or less a kind of a classic. It was so well done, yeah.
Jitterbug kid, shaking himself to death.
Sergeant.
Lie still, boy. Lie still.
Si, Padre. Si. Yes, Father, I remember. I learned it by heart. Just like you say it. Pecados ni mis cogitaciones.
I confess that I have sinned exceedingly.
Verbo et opera.
Thought, word, and deed.
Mea culpa.
Through my fault.
Mea culpa.
Through my fault. Through my most grievous fault.
During that war, they had what they called the Victory Caravan Tour, where all the big Hollywood stars would go out and try and sell war bonds.
I knew Desi and met him on the Victory Caravan. And Desi was some kind of character. We were having so much fun selling bonds. We started in Washington. And I never forget, Groucho got in the cab with Mrs. Roosevelt. And Charlotte Greenwood stepped off the plane and did a high kick. And he nudged Mrs. Roosevelt and said, "You could do that too if you put your mind to it." Imagine saying this to the First Lady, you know.
The first picture that I ever made where I had any kind of a part, Damon Runyon chose me for a picture called The Big Street.
I'm happy now, Pink. I'm happy for the first time in my life.
She was wonderful in it, and she was very proud of it. And that let me know that she always considered herself a serious actress, not just a comedian.
That did it, Pink. Nobody can ever call me a broken down and camapo again.
He got me up there as fast as he could, and all the time I'm dying, my head's bobbing, I'm dead. My arms are hanging, and he's saying, "Very sick, what'd you eat for lunch?"
Well, Best Picture or not, it didn't make a dime, and RKO dropped her contract. Luckily, though, she signed on with MGM.
Well, I don't mind the band playing, but if this crowd doesn't stop shoving, I'll scream. My public.
I'm sure Mom took a good look at herself, and she said, "I'm 33 years old, I'm just another Hollywood blonde." And she decided to change her image. Well, she changed her hair color anyway.
Now, don't you worry worry about me. I'm not falling for anyone. Not until I see the whites of their checkbooks.
Uh-oh. Maybe that's your rich guy.
Maybe that's my poor guy.
Maybe not a big-time actress. At least Hollywood was beginning to call my mother that crazy redhead. Unfortunately, Hollywood wasn't calling my father at all. But when the Army did, and his citizenship finally came through, he answered. This separation was about to create one more casualty of the war.
A home movie. Lucy and Desi, a home movie, continues.
I'm so lonely and blue when I'm without you. I don't know what I'd do, sweetheart, without you. The joy and tears that love endears would have no meaning if I didn't have you to keep me dreaming. I think the only time they ever wrote love letters to one another was during that separation. And my mother saved every single one of them. Lucy, sweetheart, you have no idea how happy you've made me. Really and fully happy. You're a wonderful baby, and I adore you. I don't mistrust you, baby, but I am jealous. I can't deny that. Bye, Desi. My baby, you called about an hour or so ago. I'm kind of lonesome tonight. Kind of lost again. Desi, darling, please don't worry about me. Believe me, I wouldn't do anything to make you unhappy. If you are going to do the right thing as conscientiously as I am, we have nothing to worry about. Please believe that. All my love, forever and ever, your wife. That was a tough time for them marriage-wise, too, wasn't it?
I don't know, because I don't remember a time that wasn't tough. By that, I mean that his indiscretions were always disturbing.
He fooled around with other ladies, apparently. And he'd tell me till his dying day that he didn't fool around the way they said he did. That they made a bigger thing out of some of his flirtations than what was really going on.
That a lot of ladies kind of threw themselves at him, and, you know, men are men, or at least Latins are Latins. And he succumbed to some of these little affairs.
She told me the first time when she knew that he was somewhere that she wished he weren't. She told me that the first time almost, it was very bad for her.
But he had never had an intention of hurting her. He never wanted to hurt her, and did constantly.
When they were together, Desi and Lucy, they loved each other very much. The problem was Desi with a playboy, you know, and the separation. That was the beginning of the whole problem, you know.
In 1944, Grandpa Hunt, the man my mother called Daddy, died. Shortly after that, she decided to file for divorce.
I'll tell you how charming he was. She was on her way to file for divorce in court one morning, and she stopped off at the hotel room where he was staying, and she never got to court.
Si, senorita, I know that you will like the chicky boom chick, 'cause it's the dance of Latin romance. And Cuban Pete doesn't teach you in a hurry like Arthur Mary. You're now in Havana, and there's always mañana. So, señorita, please.
When Dad came home from the Army, he was happy to see that nothing in Chatsworth had changed. Unfortunately, that was true of his movie career as well.
He felt he really belonged in the nightclubs, where he really enjoyed himself, as you could see.
So Desi called me from Los Angeles. He said, I am getting out the Army in a few months, and I'm going to form my orchestra. And of course, I want you to be my music director and arranger. We're going to open at the Copacabana Club in New York City. That was in 1946. And from there on, I stayed with Desi throughout all his tours, throughout the preparation of the I Love Lucy show.
At that time, there were only two great Latin bands in the country, Cugat and your dad. And he'd get out with those drums and go across the stage into the audience and everything else, and get in front of a good-looking woman and beat the drums like crazy, you know, sing Babalu.
Babalu, 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 aye, Babalu, aye. Está pensando lo velorio.
He did have a different band.
¿Y qué le hacemos a Babalu?
The girls liked him, the women liked him.
Va ponerlo en cruz. Y dame un cabo de tabaco,
Because he needed the bookings, he would put up with a lot of one-nighters, one-night stands that were tougher than hell. And my job was to handle all the payroll and all the transportation, and then take care of him at night, because we were up half the night, you know, boozing or whatever. We get to Las Vegas for, I think we were there 2 weeks, and the first week I made the payroll, the second week he gambled it all away.
My father was on the road, and my mother was making another picture, Sorrowful Jones, which was the first picture that she made with Bob Hope.
I won't sleep a wink tonight.
You're off key, like always.
Lucy's been back here working, and it's pretty hard to keep a marriage together by telephone.
It brought the problem that they have of fighting, and that sometimes she used to call and he wasn't there, he was fooling around some places and things like that, and that it was an argument, you know.
She certainly built up a wall against it. I guess repetition. And then she didn't say it so vulnerably after a while, and she would say, oh, he's with another dame.
Oh, Andrew, if you're tired of me and you want to find excitement someplace else, just say so.
Oh, now, Clara, let's not start all that over again. I tell you, I've been working.
There was a lot of stress in the marriage, and I think my father thought it might be wise to spend a little time with the wife. She was doing 22 weeks of summer stock in this play called Dream Girl, and so Dad started to make plans for this romantic rendezvous.
And she was in Detroit. And Desi decided that he wanted to fly to Detroit to see her, and that we would send the band in the bus we had chartered to our next opening. So I chartered a plane, and we go to the airport, driving thunderstorm. We get in this little plane. We finally do get to Detroit. But the bus takes off with these guys, and rear ends a truck. And one of the guys lost an eye, and they broke legs and arms. And the seat that's sitting up front next to the driver is where Desi and I used to sit, always. And those are the ones that really got clobbered. So either Desi or me or both barely missed.
This crash was like a wake-up call, and I think they both knew that they had to try a whole lot harder if they were going to make this marriage work. And for starters, my mother wanted to find a way to get my father to stay home.
Lucy called me up, and we just lost Stan Kenton, the band. You know, they went somewhere, and we had an opening. So Lucy called me and said, put Desi on. So, you know, I put Desi in his band on. You were on for 2 years, weren't you?
Yeah.
And the writers would give Desi a line, and he'd walk up to the thing and spit all over the microphone, and the guacamole would fall out.
Oh, he wasn't kidding. I didn't even, not only couldn't I say them well, I didn't understand the jokes, you know.
Desi stayed in Hollywood and didn't go on the road to be with Lucy.
My parents were actually married to each other twice. The second time was in the Catholic Church because they were trying to have children, and I think my father's mother convinced them that the reason they didn't was because they weren't married in the eyes of God.
Forever, darling, while other hearts go wandering, you'll find mine as faithful as can be. Forever, my darling, I'll be your true love forever and forever. I'll care for you eternally, eternally. I've known your kiss and I've been close to heaven. The thrill of this will last me till my life is through. I made this promise, and willingly I'll keep it forever, forever, darling. You will find me true ever and ever, forever, forever, forever. Darling, you will find me true.
Shortly after that, my mother actually did get pregnant. It really was a new beginning.
Oh, for just the chance to love you, would I love you, love you, love you.
She adored this husband of hers so much that she wanted the cementing fact of a child of theirs.
Sure as there's a moon above you.
I think she felt that when the children arrived, it would be better.
The children would not arrive for another 2 years. She lost the first baby, and it really broke her heart.
Heart and soul.
Being pregnant was the most important thing in her life. And your mother always had sort of a fantasy thing about families and grandmothers and all of that, the dream.
Lucy and Desi were married, and the two mothers were always with them. I mean, there couldn't have been two more opposite personalities, background, you know. Lolita came from a very privileged level of society in Cuba, where, of course, help, I mean, you have help by the dozens, and you never lifted a finger.
Lolita was so very much the lady, very, very standoffish.
This was such a lonely, solitary soul. She was indifferent to the world around her. Her world was her bed and her bathroom. Desi, who loved his mother very much, often went weeks without even seeing her. She wasn't much fun to visit.
Dee Dee was the commander. Everything revolved around Dee Dee. She was the driving force. And Lucy took on that trait.
Dee Dee wasn't afraid of anybody or anything. She was a character right up until a few months before she died. She wore hot pants. She was honest, she was straightforward, and she never hesitated to call it like it was.
Desi was never close to Dee Dee. In our moments of quiet together, Dee Dee would say to me, "Oh, that damn spick." He was good to her. They supported her in style, but she never liked him. She tolerated him.
Did Desi ever talk about his relationship with his father?
There was a certain egotism in Dr. Arnaz. He wouldn't let Desi have the last word, and I think Desi felt for him. This man came from everything to nothing. He sort of took care of Papa.
This
Those were people trying desperately to be a family. And there are no perfect families out there. There aren't. And the fact that we are haunted, you know, by the Donna Reed shows and Father Knows Best is not a reason to expect that your family is like that, because nobody's is.
Hey, Pete, I took a message for you. Your wife called. She said she'd meet you at the same place, and she said love.
By 1950, my mother had made more than 60 movies. She was usually playing the girl who didn't get the guy, but still, she attracted lots of attention.
Love. Whenever you went anywhere, people just tended to go to Lucy and he would be off to the side. I imagine that was very difficult for a man who had been up to bat and succeeded before and seen his name first in lights being sort of disregarded.
You know, I think if it wouldn't have been for Lucy, I would have stopped trying a long time ago, because I was always the guy that didn't fit.
I always have claimed that I Love Lucy was born in my den in my house, though not literally. But that's when the thinking about it began. We'd all talk about what can they do to get their lives as one, because they were so separated. The two careers were, you know, divergent.
We've been married 9 years and been together a year and 2 months. If that. You can't have children that way. You cannot have them by telephone.
Is that right?
That's right.
Yes, it's the new Gay Family series starring Lucille Ball with Richard Denning as Liz and George Cooper.
She was doing a radio show called My Favorite Husband.
If I were you, I'd divorce me.
Well, not till we get a television set. I want custody of it.
And CBS wanted to adapt it to television.
And when I was asked to do television, it was new to everyone, the networks and people in general, and the studios frowned upon it.
Film stars basically have always tried to stay away from television.
Lucy certainly, no agent would have let her go into television if she were a star at that time. Things had faded and faded.
And she says, I'd do it if Desi plays the husband.
No one wanted him to play my husband because he was Cuban, and they wanted a real American couple.
So I says, look, they don't think we should work together.
So we went out by ourselves in vaudeville to prove that the audiences would buy us.
I said, let's try it. The next time I go with a band on tour, you come with me, and we'll do a couple of numbers together. I had a very dear friend of mine, Pepito, the Spanish clown. He gave her a couple of clown bits. She did the clown bit. She did Cuban Pete with me, in which she sang, they call me Sally Sweet, I'm the queen of the Lancey Street, and pum, 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 and knock my hat off my head. And the audience throughout the country, they love us being together. So I said, well, now I don't care what the networks, the agency, or anybody says. If those folks there likes us, that's it. So then we started working on the pilot, and the pilot was 80% of what we done on the stage.
And their next production was 100% of what they were doing off the stage.
I was in my dressing room at the Roxy, and he was in his dressing room taking a nap. And I had the so-called rabbit test, or whatever they call it, on Friday. And we had our radios on, and in those days everybody listened to Winchell, you know. And Winchell came on and said I was pregnant. And he had heard it on his radio. We met in the hall and just said, if he says it, it's got to be true.
I'm pretty good with babies. How would you like to have me for a mother, huh?
We did the I Love Lucy pilot during the last season on radio. She was 6 months pregnant at the time, and we had a rush to get it done.
We just had a little home in the San Fernando Valley, and we had no intention of going to New York. So I said, who's going to New York? So the sponsor said, well, you can't do it in California because all we get here is the Kinescope. I said, well, why don't we do it on film? And then everybody will get the same quality.
Then we found out you couldn't use film unless you shot in a studio.
But then CBS came in and said, well, Lucy works better in front of an audience. And they were right. She does work better in front of an audience.
Now, that was impossible because you could not bring an audience into a studio.
So, you know, me out of left field, ignorance is a blessing at times. I said, well, why don't we do it on film in front of an audience? And they said, what is that? Well, I said it, so I figure I better say it like if I knew what I said. I said, the film in front of an audience. He said, you know how to do that? I said, sure. I didn't have the slightest idea about it.
He just did it all. He built the whole thing and saw that everything that we wanted in the innovative department got done.
Can you imagine a guy in the early days of television when everything was kinescope? He insisted on having film. And he had probably one of the best cameramen in the history of movies, Carl Freund.
I did figure that, you know, you do it with 3 cameras like you're doing now, they're electronic. Why couldn't you put 3 motion picture cameras, you know, and do it? And that's how it began, out of an accident.
And it became great because of the preservation that was able with the film instead of the kinescope. Kinescope doesn't last. You couldn't have had reruns, you could have had nothing preserved if everything had gone on being on kinescope.
That's why it's still being shown today.
And Desi Arnaz was just a naturally astute and far-sighted businessman.
And in those days, I believe roughly each episode with film cost about $5,000 or $6,000 an episode more over and above the other. So Philip Morris said, well, who's going to pay the extra $5,000? We're not. And CBS says, well, we're not. And the story goes, Desi says, tell you what, amigos, Lucy and I will put up the $5,000, but on one condition. What? We own the films. Good, you got them, CBS said.
Desi obviously had the foresight to see what this would mean, and when he was given the opportunity of owning the films, he said, yes, I definitely want to own the films. And he wanted to set up his own production company. And that was really a first. And it led to all kinds of things because we created a separate company, a separate corporate entity called Desi Lou Productions.
It's Desi Arnaz with your tropical trip.
You know, ladies and gentlemen, I've always had a great ambition to sing a song on the radio to my daughter. And we're going to make a record of it. And when she grows up, I'll play it for her. And that way she'll have definite proof that her old man sang and that there was a thing called radio. So here it is, specially written for Lucy Desiree Arnaz by her father and Eddie Maxwell. I hope you're listening, miss. There's a brand new baby at our house, the nicest little gift we've ever had. She's a precious sugar plum and a blessing to her mommy and dad. There's a brand new baby at our house, and though she's been there just a little while, in the parlor, in the hall, every picture on the wall wears a smile.
She deeply, deeply loved her children and wanted them desperately. And your arrival was one of the, probably the highlight in her life.
I had them very late. My first child was, I was 39, and I was so happy to have them that I was afraid that I would spoil the hell out of them.
She tells me she waited 10 years to have a child. She wanted to have a baby so much. I was born in 1951, and a month later they started the I Love Lucy shows.
We had more fun on the set than we could look forward to at any party in the evening, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes we say, we've had so much fun today, we want to go out tonight. And
then the people that work with us, you know, Fred and Ethel, they were just sensational.
Yeah. I think Lucy and Vivian were like sisters. They got on each other's nerves and they adored each other.
Someone heard about a young lady who was going to be in La Jolla doing a play, so they called me back after the first act of Voice of the Turtle and said, Lucy, sight unseen, take our word for it, this girl is wonderful. I said, that's all I want to hear. We fell in love with the first rehearsal. She was something.
Nobody wanted Bill Frawley to play Fred. The networks didn't want it, the agencies didn't want it. They said he hadn't done anything in a long time. He had a drinking problem, and the more they kept knocking him down, the more I thought he was right for the part.
He was exactly the way he was written. He cared more about baseball and the fights than he did about anything. If his work interfered, to hell with the work. He wasn't there.
And he was one of the most loved characters in the series, really. No place we went in the country, everybody said, where's Fred? How's Fred?
Everybody was enthusiastic, everybody was working together, and it was fun.
And the only reason they did the show was to stay together. So they went at it for all the right reasons originally.
We thank the Lord, whose love and wondrous powers gave us that brand new baby of ours.
After you shave.
These are two people who sought to attain the highest they could possibly attain in this business.
Are you nervous?
Nervous? Why should I be nervous? Are you nervous?
No.
No.
They fought very hard to get to the top, and they made it.
Suddenly had taken over as a huge hit, probably the first year, and they were going to the theater. And as they walked in, a little bit before curtain time, he said people started applauding. And he looked around and he said, somebody big must have come in. And they looked around and it was for them, and they had no idea. They couldn't believe it.
At its peak, I Love Lucy is in something like 60 countries.
These are two people who brought so much joy to so many people, and I hear it constantly, constantly.
If you ever looked at the mail that we got thereafter, thousands of letters from women saying, you saved my marriage, thousands of letters from men saying, you saved my marriage. It's a love match on the show. I don't care what anybody else says. You cannot fake that inherently on the air.
2 years into I Love Lucy, my mother discovered that she was pregnant again with my brother Desi.
They said, what do we do now? And we all sat down, and Desi said, how about having the baby on the show?
You believe they won't let us do it? They said, well, can you hide her, you know, behind high chairs or sitting down on a table? I says, not Lucy. When she gets pregnant, brother, there's no question about it. You couldn't even say the word pregnant in those days. Right. They say I had to say expecting. It was better for me to use expecting anyway. Yeah.
So it was going to be a cesarean. It was time to coincide with the birth of little Ricky on the show. So your dad and I paced the floor outside the delivery room. All of a sudden we hear Lucy say, "It's a boy!" And he just literally jumped for joy.
There's a brand new baby at our house.
And he knocked the inauguration of President Eisenhower off the front pages. 16 years later, President Eisenhower was standing outside the El Dorado Country Club, and he said, "Is that the young man that knocked me off the front pages?" For years, the people would run up to Desi and say, "Would you please sign little Ricky?" And that didn't set too well when he was 8, 9, 10.
They used to say, like, "You're little Ricky," and I'd go, "No, I'm not." And so my whole life was about saying to people, "No, I'm not who you think I am." They used to say, "You're different," and I used to go, "No, I'm not. We're just kids."
Whenever old man trouble makes trouble arise, just pull that big straw hat over your eyes. You'll never see the circumstance making you frown if you just push your eyes under the ground.
My most vivid recollections of both you and your brother are when you at the picnics.
We all had marvelous times, and it meant a great deal, you know, to the employees there.
All of the little kids would have their picture taken with Lucy or Desi, and they were, and then we had softball games, and they were really family picnics. And you and your brother and your grandmother, and we were all like one big family.
And then after a while, unfortunately, that's when they gave up on it because it was just too much work, and time became much more valuable.
Are you now, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
The McCarthy era was a disgraceful chapter in the history of this country. And to associate her with it is just ridiculous.
There was a blind item in Walter Winchell's column that said, "What top TV red-haired comedian is a card-carrying communist?"
I certainly didn't think it was me. And the phone rang. And Desi said, "I expect some people about 1 o'clock." And this was 9. I said, "What are you getting, a party?" And he said, "No, honey. You're in trouble."
Desi told me the story about Lucy's grandfather who had raised her. He was a socialist, you know.
And he used to bang on us all the time about, you know, you got to register communists and you got to register.
So they went down and registered, and that was it. And of course it all backfired years later.
But it was one of those dreadful and untrue, vicious attacks. Many, many of my friends in radio never worked again.
They had this famous press conference before the show one night, and Desi told the story about the grandfather and everything else.
She didn't even know who the mayor of Los Angeles was.
How did you get the
The only thing red about her was her hair. And even that was not legitimate.
The whole thing blew over just like that. Say the House Un-American Activities Committee had really clamped down on Lucy. She'd been out of the business, really. Been out of the business.
We're just going along as we please, breezing along.
So they breezed right along from television straight into the movies. And they had another big hit with the Long, Long Trailer.
First you dice the carrot, slice the onion, chop the pepper fine. Then you sift the flour, grind the meat, and salt and pepper freely. Then you add some garlic. Oh, not too much now, just the soup, son.
Occasionally she would have thoughts about the script, some doubts.
And she would say, "This doesn't work."
And Desi would say, "Now, honey, everything's going to be fine." And he said that was good enough for her.
Lucy told me many, many times what a genius Desi was when it came to the use of props. It's a rare talent.
Because he had a great sense of comedy, which his wife did not have. Lucy didn't know what was funny in concept. When she did
On the paper.
The greatest in the world.
What's the matter, honey? Can you sleep?
We've been crying his name for years. Give him credit for the comedy and for organization, for everything.
Desi already was a star in everybody else's mind except Desi Arnaz.
Time magazine asked me one time, if you had to split the percentage of the success of I Love Lucy between yourself and the actors and the actresses and the writers, how would you do it? Who would you give the credit? I said, well, give Lucy 90% and split the rest between us.
Lucy and Desi were the two funniest, most wonderful people when they were playing the Ricardos, and they still have the world's most loved television show, probably never go off the air. And yet it wasn't all there is.
I remember they always went to Del Mar every summer, and Desi loved it.
They rented a house up the beach from us.
You could go out and swim in the morning and get dressed for the races by 2 o'clock.
He would bet very heavily, always at the big $100 windows, and she would bet on every horse in the race.
And I remember we used to sit with Jimmy Durante, and one of the things I can remember is how big his nose was.
But I would always go down the beach to where Desi and Jimmy were fishing.
They were very, very good friends.
Palm Springs was a very valuable getaway for both Lucy and Desi. For Desi particularly because of the club and golf.
We had 3 beautiful homes. We had expensive vacations. My parents' success brought us a lifestyle that most people can only dream of.
When Desi was around, there was a lot more money, it seemed like. There were big parties.
At all of our parties, there were costume parties. We were doctors, Indians,
Cowboys.
Nurses.
Right.
I was a king a lot of the time.
They'd get props and set pieces from the studio, so it really looked like a town
or
in the
like
background.
or like it was a carnival and we
Right.
could be clowns or stuff like that.
Real little Ferris wheel they had, actually.
I never got the sense that this was a normal household.
I will never forget driving in front of your house on Roxbury. Your mother was standing in the doorway. She had on slacks that were sort of the king and I blue color, a pink fuzzy sweater on with the orange hair, and it was exactly like when I was a kid, when I'd see movie magazines, when it would say, "A visit with Lucille Ball," standing at the door. My dear, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven.
Lucy in my childhood was very, very, in that respect, growing up in that home, very public.
So it's like when you grow up and you have people rapping on your door 27 times a day, is that a fair number? You know, saying, is she home, are they home, pulling the grass out of your lawn.
But the interesting thing was that Mom and Dad could have lived in other areas in Beverly Hills where it was secluded.
When I first came to California, your mother wanted me to live there at the house, which I was certainly thrilled to do. I mean, the next door neighbor is Jack Benny.
Oh, I gotta tell you about Jack Benny. He came over one night at dinner time.
I swear to you, we're sitting there eating. Jack Benny comes in playing the violin.
Just walked around the table 3 times, never said a word.
Doesn't say, "Is this funny?" Forget it, nothing. We heard him go all the way home. Da 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 da. I thought, this is really a miracle here I'm living.
Desi, isn't this beautiful? This is a brand new 1960 Westinghouse refrigerator.
You broke it. Refrigerators don't open in the middle. Do something.
Well, what happened? What's that?
My parents had become America's best known and most admired married couple. They both worked very hard to promote their image.
She worked very hard. I mean, she was willing to work just like a dog all the time, you know, love rehearsal.
If you want something done, ask a busy person to do it, because the more you do, the more you can do. And don't you forget it.
Desi just seemed to run the studio with one hand and the show with another. I don't know how he did it. We used to call him the Cuban arm because he could charm you and then he'd come up, put his arm around you, call you amigo.
They were there very early, and then of course he was running back and forth from the set to, you know, juggling the business, and the pressure was building.
They were never really as happy with any of the rest of it, any of the trappings and the houses and the kids, as they were when they were at work.
And to spend the time in their careers that Lucy and Desi had to spend to do it successfully, they had to take some time away from the kids. And they're raised by the servants.
Willie Mae Barker was her name, and she was another woman in my life, as well as my mother and my grandmother, Dee Dee.
She had Dee Dee to take care of you, and that's as good as her, Lucille, taking care of you, in her mind. And now that may not be right, but she didn't think it was wrong. She really didn't.
I really feel that Lucille just didn't have the tools to learn to mother or to nurture. They just weren't there for her. I think Lucille had to be an adult as a child, just had to take over, because Dee Dee was always working.
I never learned to have a playful relationship with my mother because we were always too busy.
In that respect, I never saw your mother play with you. I didn't. She would say, "I love you," and that, but I never saw her play with you.
I remember your mother being very on when people were around, and then when people were not around, being very off. It was like your mom had an on-off switch.
I like discipline in children. I like to be able to have the children likable so that other people will like them.
Yeah,
I know. I don't want a little brat running around. It's bad enough what they do.
If she wasn't in control, then she was pretty unhappy.
She was always so busy making sure everything was right. She wanted you all to be, everything to be perfect. And I think your daddy always impressed me as he knew you weren't and he wasn't. He was more outwardly affectionate.
He was working all the time. But when he came home, he would do stuff with us.
My father had this amazing sense of wonder at the miracle of nature. And he'd just take your hand and walk you around and say things to you about, you know, isn't that, look at that sunset. God really outdid himself tonight, you know. And Lucy and I would sit there looking at, like, wow. And he'd instill in us this sense that there was something about this life that was worth living.
When my mother came home, she would still be working. Do you know what I'm saying? She would still be working. I have to fight every day of my life not to go home to my kids and be there physically but not be there. I'm still on the phone. I'm still cleaning silver. I'm still cleaning a closet. I'm not, hello, Mom, you've been gone all day. Could we just like sit down and color or go outside? It was really hard for her to be there.
In ways, I feel sort of sorry for her because I feel that she never let herself go. She never let herself love you kids the way she could have, or maybe even love Desi the way she could have.
Lucille Ball envisioned the white picket fence, and I think indeed believed that fantasy. She did not live it, but in her mind, her interviews were always about the family, my children come first, work is down the line. It is my belief that Lucille Ball's first love was her work.
The best time is when you're working and you're happy, and we really had a ball.
I think there are a lot of parents that can be gone, and when they come back, they're really there. They're really connected with their kids, and I just think that these two people had enough problems of their own, for various reasons, that they needed that work.
The credit line has nothing.
Forever, darling.
Movies, television shows, commercials. My dad managed all of my parents' projects, and he co-starred every week in I Love Lucy, and he also ran Desi Lou Studios on top of it.
He also took enormous risks. I mean, when you stop to think that he went and bought RKO during a break in the show, which we were doing.
$6 million cash. That was the deal. My heavens, after having started at RKO at $75 a week, now she owns the studio.
And he built a dynasty. I mean, he had 16 shows on the air. We owned 3 studios, and Desi did it all. All I did was have babies and do the show, and loved every minute of it.
But at one time or another, you had many, many big stars working for Desi Lou.
Yeah, mainly I had Lucy.
Yeah.
That was quite a bit of help.
Yeah, but off of that.
No matter how hard he worked or what a great businessman he was, she was the one with all the accolades and the credits, and she was the clown. The show was built around her, you know, and the backstage portions that he did were not acknowledged in those days. The show got on, it was good, and it worked, and they went on from there, and I think he kept trying to do it more and more and more and more and more and bigger and better, and, you know, hello, I'm here working too, and he never got the credit till he was dead.
Desi's desire to be a man in his own right was somewhere along the line taken away from him.
There was a certain rivalry in Dr. Arnaz. He did not want Desi, in his great importance, to be more important than he had been.
The fact that Lucy became the star of the show only increased that. It was already there. His anger, maybe his mother.
Lolita, I thought, was very domineering, and she just demanded that Desi would take care of her and buy her things, in fact, a car that she couldn't even drive. I think she looked on him more like a replacement of a husband. He felt very obligated.
I don't think Desi ever knew how good he was in many respects. And he took it out in other ways.
It's one thing to be sort of a philanderer. It's another thing to do it and have it known.
Desi once said to us, what the hell's the matter with her? I love her. I don't go out with other women. I go out with hookers. That's the Latin culture, you see. That's perfectly acceptable, but Lucy couldn't accept it.
Real honest-to-God Latin, and he never changed.
And he never considered it disloyalty. He didn't think it had anything whatsoever to do with his marriage or his wife.
It became obvious that there were troubles because it began to be talked about. And then, of course, Desi's drinking, which started about the middle of '55, if memory serves me.
I think the pressures of the studio and stress, you reach for a drink in the afternoon to relax, or, you know, and that's a trap.
A lot of what we do is looking for happiness in the wrong places. A lot of money, power, and drugs and alcohol are one of the other things that we think will help us feel better.
His drinking reached a point where he had a wake-up drink that straightened him out. He was drunk at 11.
He got to the point where he really no longer was in control of himself, and his opinions were out of drunkenness, you know, out of alcohol.
Just like any other family, we had problems in our family, and so part of the problem was admitting that there was a problem.
Well, I'm sick and tired of the whole thing.
It seems to me you're just sick of me. You just don't like our whole marriage, Lorenzo Vega.
Well, maybe I don't, Susie Vega.
I think they would have loved to have been the Ricardos. But unfortunately, the Ricardos had a way of kissing and making up. I think they both found it extraordinarily hard to say I'm sorry.
They weren't getting along, and we knew it.
What's happened to us, Susie?
It was an era where people didn't get help, so they didn't have anybody explaining to them why they were the way they were. So it was just sort of a vicious circle, I think.
You know, I keep remembering the way it was the first year of our marriage. We had something then that seems to have slipped away from us. In those days, there was nobody in the whole world but just you and me. That's why I want you to go on the strip with me, because I think it gives a chance to get to know each other again.
He went to Europe for the reason that so many people, when their marriage is breaking up, they decide they're going to somehow, you know, recapture something.
Oh yeah, I remember all of the trips, because I'll tell you, those days were very intense, because that was when they were really going at it.
And I remember hearing them scream, and the two doors were open, and my mother was leaning over him with her long red nails. They were poised at him like that. And she said, with her teeth gritted in her mouth in a horrible position, "I wish you were dead."
Of course, this was all a disaster trip because your father's drinking just increased enormously, and he was drunk a great deal of this time and fell down in the cobblestones, and the face was all, you know, the next morning the face was all purple and looked like a pomegranate.
It scared me to death. I think as a kid, all you're worried about is are they going to go away and leave me? Maybe I even thought it was my fault. I don't know. It was scary.
We were very young, and we knew what was going on, and it was very, very bad for everyone.
She had to leave him, you know. They separated.
Every time I hear, "You better sit down, kids," I have a lot of trouble with that because it's exactly what happened.
We'll always remember when they sat us down and said, "Look, you know, things aren't working." I mean, I remember word for word. You know, I was 6 years old. I remember word for word what they said.
Even though they tried to maintain a working relationship, after the divorce, my parents' professional partnership fell apart too.
Is that the toughest
Yes.
period of your life?
Yes. It got tough on the set, too, at the end. At the thought of quitting.
I knew it was the end. It was the end of something very special, and I remember being very upset.
I will never forget the day they were doing the last of the I Love Lucy's, and she was playing a geisha. and the white makeup. And she'd been crying a lot. The eyes were extremely red. It gave her a rather, in looking at her, what I thought was a grotesque look, because the eyes, and sad.
But kisses and hugs and tears was the ending.
It's a tragedy in many ways because they went at it for all the right reasons originally. And the only reason I Love Lucy exists is because they wanted to be together so they could have a family and make the marriage work. So they made this show that took off like gangbusters, and now the rest of the universe has it, and they never had it. They never got what they wanted. My parents were divorced. I tried to have my mother screen at our house because we could screen movies there. The Parent Trap, which was a Disney movie starring Haley Mills, who played twin sisters who tried to get her two divorced parents back together again. And it worked.
And it worked. They get them back together at the end, and there's the happy ending. And still to this day, I think that life is about finding the happy ending.
In my heart of hearts, I thought that she would go back to my father and they would work it out. And I think I'm not the only kid in America who probably did that.
Desi was already married to Edie. Gary and I were already married, and we were still looking at Parent Trap until finally the 7th time we said, kids, now listen, it's too late.
Lucy got a little more demanding after she and Desi split up.
The Lucy Show. Here's Lucy.
She was by herself. She looked around and he wasn't there. And so she said, oh, I got to do it all by myself. And she didn't know how to do that tactfully.
She treated all the guest stars the same way she treated me. I mean, it was move over, do this, do that. And I remember Jack Benny. He's going, she said, Jack, for sake, move it. Come over here. And finally he turned to me and he said, somebody tell her she has the job.
Now cut that out!
I think when all of her series ended, I think for her not to have a workplace to go at 10 o'clock in the morning was the biggest blow to her of anything. I think that's when she aged. I think that's when a certain bitterness came.
She just became more and more isolated. That was my impression of her as she got older.
And then she got into backgammon. She could play backgammon. As long as somebody would sit across from her and play with her, she would play.
Well, the public didn't see too much of my dad in his later years, but he taught at San Diego State for a while, and he wrote an autobiography, which did pretty good. And then he pretty much withdrew to Del Mar and to a beautiful home he built in Baja. And he took care of his mother till the day he died.
I think he was running from his work, from the past. He had great ideas, but then he'd start drinking and he couldn't finish it. I'm happy down here, he'd say. And yet he wasn't.
When I went through drug and alcohol recovery, I went to stay with my father. I had reached a point in my life through a program that was, I give credit to for saving my life, called the New Life Foundation, that helped me see certain things. And Dad went through recovery with me 4 years later. And that was probably the most courageous thing that Dad ever did. But physically, it was too late.
At the end, he wanted to be at the beach and fish and watch sunsets. And she wanted to be alone and play games with friends. They could have done that in 1951. I don't know.
I think Lucy and Desi were so intertwined emotionally, their life, their professional life, and their private life. It was hard for either one of them to give up the other completely. And I doubt if they did.
He would sit with me and cry He actually cried sometimes in talking about how much he loved her and how terrible it was that they were divorced. And he loved her to his dying day.
When she talked about your daddy, when he was no longer coming to the house, she cried. And she would say, that was the love of my life, but I couldn't take it anymore.
What would I say to Lucy if she was standing right here?
I would say, Aunt Lucy, it's okay. Let us all in. We love you. And I would say to my Uncle Desi, I would say, stay. We want you. We love you. Let's be a family.
I think my favorite home movie scenes are of my parents playing with my brother Desi and me in the pool. Just us. So it's fitting that the last time they were ever photographed together was in our pool with my son, their first grandchild, Simon.
Grandpapa, grandpapa, la ta ta ta, grandpapa, la ta ta ta, grandpapa, speaking Spanish, ta ta ta.
Óyeme, señor.
All my life I've been telling you to speak in Spanish.
All your life you've been telling me I don't know how to speak English.
No, I've been telling you to speak Spanish to the kids.
They made fun of me.
Now he tells.
Óyeme, Simón. Tú y yo vamos a hablar en español, ¿verdad? Esa gente...
He did what I did. No, you don't push Daddy away. You don't push them.
That's all right. That's all right.
More Spanish.
Oh, it's all right.
Tell him that.
¿Qué te pasa a ti? ¿Que no quieres que te hable en español?
Well, talk to him.
Háblame a mí, chico.
Talk to him.
Háblame a mí un poquito. Babaloo, 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 babaloo. Ay, 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 babaloo, 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 ay, ay, babaloo, ay. Bravo, bravo. Applause, 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 applause. Applause, 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 applause. Applause, 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 applause. Applause, 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 applause. Bravo, 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 bravo. I love Lucy, and she loves me. We're as happy as we can be. Sometimes we quarrel, but then how we love making up again. Lucy kisses like no one can. She's my missus, and I'm her man. So I'm in heaven, you see, 'cause I love Lucy, yes, I love Lucy, and Lucy loves me.